So here we are with a vanilla patch, and I'm going to design this sound from scratch. That rhymed unintentionally. So I know I want a long release time, and I know I want sort of a soft sound, so the oscillators want to be sine wave or a little bit of sawtooth. We'll have the filter envelope controlling the character of the sound, so we'll also add some filter envelope to FM modulation. I'm giving it a fairly closed low-pass filter with a slowed attack on the filter envelope. I'm adding a bit of unison there. And I think the one thing I forgot to do is add envelope amount. So now just tweaking the envelopes. I think I need to close the filter a little bit more. Just tweaking the filter envelope until I get something that's similar to what I had before. Bit of reverb never hurts. And that one envelope is doing so much to affect the character of the sound. And so now the two together, and that's sounding pretty close to what I had. In the first case. So once I had this sound down, I figured this is probably going to be the central melodic theme of the whole track. So, you know, the next task is to go along and create supporting elements that are going to complement this melody. For the drums, I used Battery, and I just loaded up a bunch of different presets until I found something I liked. That one was called Techno Wickinger, and it's just got some good solid sounds. The cool thing about these patches or these presets is that you've got kicks on every C. You've got another alternate kick on every C sharp. So as you go up the octave, you can have different options for the different sounds. Same with the snares, same with the claps. So you can just very quickly audition different sounds by moving the MIDI notes up or down the octave. In here, in my Battery track stack, is where all the drum programming for the track goes on. And I always like to keep different regions and different channels in the arrangement for separate elements within the drums. So I've got, you know, regions for kick, regions for claps or snares, regions for hi-hats, shakers and other things. So, you know, I can very quickly remove particular elements of the drums in the mix just by selecting a region in the arrangement rather than going into the, you know, piano roll and having to find the particular MIDI note of the particular sound that I want to mute, say. You know, it's just much easier to have them available to you at the arrangement, you know, in the arrangement at the region level. So that's what's going on here. These are just different kick motifs, for example. I'll just hit S to solo and hit P for the piano roll and Command A and Z to select all and zoom all to fit. So now we can see all the kicks that I've got going on in those selected regions. Here are the claps. Hi-hats, shaker, etc. So now I'm going to just try and show you quickly how I got these ideas down. Just the quickest process I know how to put MIDI data down. So I've got the Battery MIDI channel selected and I'm entering record mode and I'm just hammering in the kick drum pattern with the click going in the background to keep me in time. So I'm just vaguely trying to remember what the kick motif did, but I'm going to go in and edit this now. Yeah, so Command A, and if I just pull the swing slider up a bit, it will quantize those notes to the 16 as shown in that little drop down with a bit of swing added to it as well. You should note that I'm currently working in region solo mode, which just allows me to listen to only particular regions that I have selected. Now in the piano roll, I'm selecting these MIDI notes, and using the Option and arrow keys, I'm able to move them by the division set. So the division's value is currently set at 16s. So every time I put a left arrow while holding the Option key, it moves the note. And equally, using the Shift and Option key, you can use up and down arrows to move the MIDI note up and down an octave. Another useful shortcut I've set up is Option S, which engages the lock mode for the region solo function. You can also Option click this button. This means that no matter what channel or region I select after engaging the solo lock mode, those particular regions will remain soloed. So I just played in the claps and quantized them. It was pretty straightforward. Again, just hitting a MIDI note in time with the kick drums or the click. And now I'm putting in an upbeat hi-hat. Same kind of thing. Simple 2-bar motif. Hit L to loop. Command A and then Q to quantize. So now I'm building up the backbone of the beat. And I want to put in a shaker. So hit R for record mode, select the regions, Option S for a solo region lock mode. And I'm just playing in a shuffly shaker pattern. And I'm just going to take the last couple of beats of that recording I made using the scissor tool, T and then 5. And I'm going to get rid of the rest. So we're just using that last bit, hit L to loop, select all. And now I'm going to use the swing slider to add about 56 of swing, which is what I put on the kick. And now I just want to play around with the velocities a bit on this shaker to give it a bit of variation. So I'm just selecting them and pulling the velocity slider down a little bit. And I think I'm going to try some different sounds. So using Shift and Option and the up and down arrows, I can move those regions up or down an octave. And I know that this drum kit conveniently has very similar sounds on all of the same notes within an octave range. So I can Shift, Option, up or down arrow and quickly find some variations. So I know this isn't exactly identical to the actual drum pattern that we had before, but it's pretty close, and I'm just trying to do this quickly. Finally, there was a crash, so I'm just trying to figure out which MIDI note that crash is. There it is, found it. And if I just hit the R key, and even when you're not playing back, if you hit a note, it will record the note that you pressed. And now I'm just getting rid of the accidental extra key that I hit. So solo these one more time, and I'm pretty satisfied that I've got something quite close to the drum pattern we had originally. So I thought this might be a good time to go to version 8 of the project, which is the last one before mastering. And I just wanted to show you how the audio channels are routed from battery into the mixer. I'm just going to move the battery track stack right to the very top, so that we have that and the mixer close together, because those are the channels that we want to be focusing on at the moment. If we just solo the drums mix bus, we're going to hear all the drums apart from the kick. We're actually hearing a little bit of reverb on the kick, and you'll see why in a second. In previous productions, I have been routing the output of the instrument that's playing the kick drum into a bus channel called kick, this channel here, and then I've been routing that into the drums bus. But I've recently learned that routing the kick drum directly to the main mix is actually a really great way of ensuring that your kick drum always remains very prominent in the mix. So really, let's solo the kick first. And we can see that it's feeding its signal directly into the mix bus, at which point I can introduce the drums channel. And we have the entire drums mix. Now, in terms of effects and stuff like that, there's really not very much happening. I've got basically no EQing on any of the elements coming out of battery because it just didn't really need it. These channels here are the bus channels where battery's auxiliary channel are sending their audio to, and really all that's going on is I have a bit of EQ on the drums group, just gently boosting the upper mid-range. And also the other thing is a drums effects channel. I'm using sends from these submix channels to send a bit of their audio into the drums effects channel, which has a space designer, basically a reverb, and the Supercharger GT plugin, which is something from Native Instruments that I've been using a lot. It's basically just a compressor with some subtle overdriving character saturation type controls. And I have it pulsing a little bit against the kick. In other words, I'm using the kick to pump the volume of the effects bus for the entire drums group, which consists mainly of reverb, but also some saturation, distortion. And basically the Space Designer plugin and the Supercharger GT plugin together provide all of those sonic characteristics, the reverb, the distortion, and the compression. Probably the best way to demonstrate this is to hit play, and you can see what's going on. Here we can see gain reduction, which is matching the kick drum because I have the sidechain set as bus 1. The sidechain input set as bus 1. Bus 1 is, as always, my kick. This is really the main reason why we go through the slightly painful process of having an auxiliary channel coming out of the software instrument, sending its audio into a bus, because in Logic, the plugin effects and instruments allow you to sidechain signal from other channels, but they only want to hear bus channels, physical inputs, or audio channels. They don't listen to software instrument channels the way that Ableton Live does, which is inconvenient, but we work around this, and it's very convenient and very organized to have all the component elements of your drums laid out in this manner. So kick drum being on bus 1 is pumping the signal of the reverb. And it's a subtle effect, but it helps to keep the kick drum very big and prominent in the mix. And you can play around with the settings on the compressor to get a more exaggerated effect. You know, and I could perhaps add some saturation. Or I could add more of the wet reverb. I think I've pushed it too far at this point, but you get the idea. So as you can see, I'm sending a little bit of all of these channels into the drums effects. And then all of these channels, apart from the kick, are routed to bus 33, which is my drums bus channel, which is right here. I've already shown you that I've got a little bit of EQ on that drums bus, but actually earlier on in the chain I have the VC2A compressor, another plugin with the Native Instruments Komplete bundle, and I really like this compressor a lot. It's just got a lot of character, and you can crank the gains a bit and get a bit of punch out of your, in this case, drums. So again, we've got the kick and drums soloed, but actually let's just unsolo the kick and listen to the drums on its own with and without the VC2A. Now there is a certain amount of just overall volume boosting going on when this plugin is on, so it is just louder when the plugin is enabled. The lack of an output gain dial on this plugin really is a big oversight on Native Instruments' part, but I'm using my VUs here to gauge how much gain reduction is going on, and we've got around about 3 decibels at most of gain reduction happening at any particular point. That's a nice conservative level to operate at. If you start seeing gain reduction in the 6 dB and over territory, then I think you're probably being a little bit too brutal with your drive or your gain into the compressor, although really it's just a stylistic thing and nothing is incorrect and you can do whatever the hell you want. But in the case of putting a bit of gentle compression on the group, the drums group, I feel that, you know, using a bit of moderation is tasteful. So that's basically what I'm looking at here with the plugin enabled. I'm adding a certain amount of incoming gain. Unfortunately, this plugin doesn't have an output gain, so I can't kind of match the output with the unaffected original sound. I can turn up the peak reduction, and now we're getting a much more exaggerated compressed sound here, which isn't what I wanted. So I'll bring the peak reduction down and the gain reduction down till it's kind of peaking at around the -3 dB gain reduction. And now let's have the kick in. So, as well, or sort of next in the chain after the VC2A compressor, I've got another supercharger, which is again a compressor and a saturation and character, or you know, overdrive unit. Let's just close this other one. And again, I've got the entire drums group, minus the kick, pumping a little bit against the kick. Again, this is to ensure that your kick drum is always very proud, very prominent. This is the technique I like to use. We've got the kick drum going directly to the master mix, and we've got the drums group that has all the drums minus the kick, just pumping a little bit underneath the kick. In fact, it's not a little bit, it's quite a lot. And it is quite subtle. It's quite tricky to hear exactly how much this is doing, but the idea is that it's doing just enough to be effective, but not enough to be blatantly obvious. So we're back at the version 1 of the project, and we're going to have a little look at the bass sounds that are going on. And really, the low end of this track is quite heavily reliant on the kick drum. So the synth bass that's going on here is more of something to support the kick and to groove with it, rather than to be the predominant focus for the low end. So again, I just dialed up a preset, but this time it was one of my own presets that I had made actually many years ago. It's a sound that I've been using in my live sets for pretty much the whole time I've been playing live as Dark Arps. So I figured it was time for that particular sound to be on a recording of some kind. So let's just close battery because we don't need it. We'll leave the virus synth open. I'll just hide it with V. And I'm just going to solo the virus on its own. So the virus baseline is being triggered by MIDI channel 1 sending to the virus TI synth. And that audio is fed back into the main virus channel where the instrument resides. So I'm soloing that. It's really actually a very simple melodic content. It's just very basic pattern of notes. but the patch's modulation and the arpeggiator in it give it a lot more complexity. I guess the best way to demonstrate this is to audition the part without the arpeggiator and the LFO, which are the two main modulators that are giving this patch the kind of characteristics that it has, especially the rhythmic characteristics that it has. I mean, this one held note is doing that, you know, and if I just hold down one note on the MIDI keyboard, you'll get an idea of what pattern the arpeggiator is playing. And it's actually quite a useful patch on its own. I can open up the filter and open up some of the macro knobs. Oops, I want on easy so you can see it, but I'm kind of opening up the release macro knob and the filter cutoff. So it's quite an expressive instrument, and as I said, it's really the arpeggiator and the LFO that give it the kind of movement that it has. So if we go to the arpeggiator and just turn it off, and then if we go to LFO and we bring the filter 1 and filter 2 amounts for LFO 2 to nothing, let's engage the link function there. Let's bring this to nothing, and now when I hold the notes, it's just a much more plain sound. And listen to the bass line soloed without its modulation. With everything else. Pretty boring. So this is the power of modulation. It can, you know, basically do a lot of hard work for you. I suppose it would be possible to, you know, program filter sweeping and lots of little notes that create the rhythmic complexity that you want, or you could let the computer, the arpeggiator, do it for you. So let's just turn the arpeggiator mode back onto up. And this is just a user pattern that I think I probably randomly entered until I got something that I liked. And, you know, couple that with variations in the timing of when you start the notes, and you get the sequence of notes restarting. So let's turn, just solo it, sorry. And open the filter so you can hear it better. So now you can hear the notes are kind of playing staccato. But we're still missing the kind of rhythmic movement in the filter, and that's what the LFO was doing for us. So let's turn this back up to, well, let's just hit play and listen to how the characteristic of the sound changes as we add more modulation to the filter. So as I close the filter cutoff a bit, we're hearing the LFO do its thing by quickly closing the filter in something that sounds a lot like an envelope. But when I turn the release up, which is what I'm doing now with one of the soft knobs, we can now hear the LFO doing its thing. And it just kind of grooves nicely with the rest of the drums. I will be including this patch with the release, so if you're a Virus TI user, you can use this sound or modify it for your own purposes. Anyway, let's close these windows, and we're going to have a look at some melodic sounds. The stabs that you hear at the very beginning of the track, I need to unsolo everything and then solo these regions. So these stabs actually originally came from the battery instrument. When I loaded the preset, and I liked the sounds that were in it, one of the sounds was these kind of ravey, chordal synth stab sounds. You know, I kind of thought these will probably be useful sounds, but I find using melodic sounds within Battery to be a bit counterintuitive. It's very difficult to, you know, play different notes on the piano scale when the sample is being played back in Battery. I wanted to export these synth stabs into a Kontakt instrument so that I could play them across a keyboard to just have a bit more control. So that's basically what I did. You'll see here that originally when I started, you know, programming the drums, I programmed the stabs in Battery, but once I decided to move them into Kontakt, I just muted those Battery regions. So all the stabs Battery regions are just not being played at all anymore. And instead, all of this is happening in Kontakt. So let's open up the Kontakt plugin, and we're going to close the virus. And we're just going to have a quick look at what's going on here. So I just have a new Kontakt instrument, and on each of the Cs, starting at C-1 upwards, I have a different flavor of basically the same kind of sound, which is this sort of old school rave stab sound. So there's that, and so on. So the idea was that I would have a bunch of different flavors to choose from, and maybe I would kind of, you know, flip between the different notes or stack them on top of each other or whatever. So I haven't really done much of that yet, but later on in the production, I start stacking these one on top of each other, and you'll see that later. In fact, we go over here. So solo this. And solo the next one with a stacked sound. Don't know if you can hear that, it's just slightly more embellished, a bit thicker. Let's go over here. And as you can see, I'm just basically using velocities here to control the volume of the different layers of this sound. I could choose to raise the velocity of these ones and lower the velocity of these ones. And we've actually got a pretty different sound here. Let's just go back to the beginning of the loop. You see the possibilities there, and this is just using velocity as a modulator, which is really the most simple, the most intuitive, the most functional way of adding dynamic, interesting changes in the way a patch sounds, just by using velocity, because you can map velocity to so many other things, not just volume. You can map it to filter cutoff. You can map it to the amount of distortion. You can map it to anything you want. And really, so far in this production, it's just doing volume, but that's powerful enough. We're going to move forward in time again to Chatter version 8, the most up-to-date version, and just have a look at what became of that Kontakt instrument and some of the MIDI programming that went on as well. Hit P for the piano roll. Here you can see some of those stabs, and I'll just open the Kontakt instrument as well. Hit the S key to solo. So you can see I'm using a variety of the different sounds that I'd selected to populate my Kontakt instrument with. And over here you can see those different zones being triggered by the MIDI notes and their velocities. I added a simple modulation to the filter cutoff for all these sounds. Again, velocity mapped to cutoff frequency and a bit of an envelope applied to the cutoff as well. So really this just makes the stabs more punchy. It gives them more of that short initial transient attack at the beginning that kind of is suitable to the type of sound that these things are. See if we can hear the difference without it. So if we have no velocity to cut off and no velocity, or sorry, no envelope to the filter, then we can open the filter cutoff to maximum, but that's too bright. There's just too much going on there. So this is why we want to use the filter to cut out the frequencies that we don't want, except that we only want those frequencies right at the beginning. That's why we use the envelope. Just back up this loop a bit, because we don't want all that crazy reverb. So now with the envelope set to a relatively high amplitude, we can set our cutoff low, and we get a punchier, sharper, and shorter sound. Now with velocity to cutoff frequency modulation enabled, we can use velocity in the MIDI notes here to, you know, subtly change the characteristics of that particular sound at that particular point. This is why I like using, you know, velocity as the main primary modulator, because it's just very easy to access. It's always there, and it's quite powerful. So, you know, I like to play around with different settings. Between the cutoff frequency, the velocity to cutoff amount, and the envelope to get the kind of sound that I want. And obviously you check it in context. The point is for them to be working rhythmically with the rest of the elements in the track, and I like to keep things short and tight, so that seems to be working quite well. We're going to stay in version 8 here and have a little look and listen to the jungle sounds that are going on in this track. I'll just solo them. Skip on. Actually forgot to also solo another sound that is kind of part of the same group, although I've given it its own bus channel, and that I've called Droid. So we've got these two major bus channels, Jungle and Droid, together. So that very annoying, abrasive sound somehow isn't annoying and abrasive in the mix with the rest of the tune, miraculously.
Even the original is full.
But here we are in the breakdown section of the tune, and those of you with a keen ear may recognize Sir David Attenborough in the background there. Here he comes again.
Even the original is full.
The man is a treasure. So what the hell is going on there, you may ask? To be honest, most of the hard work, in fact about 95% of the hard work of the weird randomness of all of that stuff, came from a modular system that I had the good fortune of being able to use at my friend Dave King, aka Long Walk Short Dog's house. Big ups, Dave. You rock. Anyway, all of this chirping and these kind of sounds from nature are a sample from a BBC documentary that we streamed off YouTube, fed into the input of a little sampler module. This thing's basically just a sampler that allows you to have a lot of fun playing with the loop lengths and start points of the sample, and you can jump around and re-trigger the sounds in really weird and crazy ways. And so, you know, we're just listening to 5 minutes or so worth of just jamming around with these sounds, playing around, getting a whole load of different weird textures. I will include this whole recording. There's about 5 minutes worth of us just noodling around with this modular system, playing back these kind of nature documentary sounds. And there's all sorts of crazy shit in here that, you know, you might find useful. So basically, armed with quite an interesting palette of sounds, I then went through the fairly tedious task of chopping up tiny little chunks of them and looping them and taking duplicates of those and changing the start points and putting little envelopes on them. These are all in regions in the arrangement, and you know, I can just solo this group. So you can see what's going on there. And when you've got so many short little slices of audio like this, it can be kind of a pain to move them around and copy them and like that. So it's actually a really good idea to pack these things into folders, which is what I've done here. These guys have not been packed into a folder, but if you select them and right-click and say pack folder, they're now inside this convenient little sub-arrangement. The looping there didn't carry for some reason. Doesn't matter. Well, that's weird. What's going on there? Anyway. And that's what I've done with this other group of sounds in the birds channel. This is just a nice little folder of these different sounds, or these different snippets of that modular recording we made, just kind of sequenced in a different order. So I'm soloing these. No, I just want to hear these ones. There we go. I decided to try to look for a rhythmic pattern in what appeared to be fairly random. I mean, when you listen to these sounds played by themselves, they don't really sound that rhythmic, but they have a kind of a personality to them, especially when you just introduce a click or something. So yeah, basically I was kind of using the weird random re-triggery stutteriness of the audio recording we made, and then just slice things in certain places and move them around so as to create an interesting rhythmic motif out of this stuff. And then in the context of the track itself, let's zoom out, select that region, hit U to set our locators to loop just around that region. And I'll unsolo everything. Yeah, it sounds cool. Maybe just the jungle. Hit the click out for the kick in. There is, of course, judicial use of sidechaining on compressors and noise gates on the Jungle Bus channel. If we go further on in the track, when the tune drops, let's just have the rest of the track in. So again, it's just a little packed folder containing little snippets of that recording, just painstakingly chopped up and moved around. And I wouldn't want anybody to sit through observing how this is made because it's so tedious. But you know, worth the time and effort that you put into it. Notice the little volume envelopes I've got going on for these guys, which actually make quite a difference to the way that particular passage sounds. I could take those off, take those fade-ins to 0. Now let's listen. As opposed to... I wanted to show you just one more piece of sound design for this track, and that is this reversey noise. And you know, every track needs some kind of reversey noise, also known as a riser, and this is it, or them together making it. Anyway, so how to make something like that is really super easy, because you already have other elements of the song to use as a palette to create the sound from. In particular, these sounds came from the existing melodic elements that were in the track. So we get this. So I'm going to sample that, or bounce it. Now I have to do a real-time bounce with this because I am using the virus. And I can't do offline bounces with the virus, so we have to be in real-time mode. All of this is correct. Add to project. Bounce, and let's just call this melody snip 01. Okay, now that we've got that recorded, I'll just go into the project bin because we added it, and here it is, and I'm going to make a new audio channel to play around with this sample with. So, new audio, let's do output 1 and 2 is fine. And I'll just place that sound, oops, back into the arrangement. And I'm going to option solo this channel, so we're only hearing that. Now the next thing I want to do is, I just want to take a very small snip of this to use to feed a delay and or a reverb. So let's just take the first 2 notes of that. And we'll have a little fade out so we don't get a pop. And now let's put some kind of, let's put a delay on this. Stereo delay, so we have a bit of a ping pong effect going on. Turn the wet mix up. And we'll have different times for the delays. Turn out the feedback. Let's see what we get. And change the timing a bit. Okay. So we've got a bit of a stereo interest going on, but we also need shitloads of reverb. And actually, in this case, I'm not going to use a space designer. I'm going to use a simple platinum verb. And the idea is just to get a very wet, highly decaying sound. Now the next thing you do is just bounce this again. This time we can do an offline bounce because there's no virus involved. Bounce, and we're going to call this reverse Atmos 01. Bounce, that's okay. Okay, we're going to make another new audio channel. And we're going to add this newly bounced audio sample that we just created. And actually in this case, I'm going to normalize it. Command A, Control N. And the final step is to simply, as I'm sure many of you have guessed, reverse it. Functions, reverse. So now we have a reversey sound. You can see a nice shape. And I'll just Option solo that channel. And so we've got this reverse sound that kind of has an interesting bit of stereo detail. That sounds pretty cool, and it's totally different to the one I made before, you know, so it's like every time you do this sort of thing, you potentially get a different result. I'd like to demonstrate one more aspect of this production that, you know, you might find quite useful. And to do that, I've selected this particular passage of the track to audition. So those sounds that I soloed, they're all kind of similar. And actually what we're currently hearing is the Beauty and Absinthe pads buses. Now, because they're similar sound in terms of frequency and they're basically occupying the same frequency bandwidth in your mix, I have the Absinthe pads basically ducking against the Beauty riff. That's this. So that when that riff plays, the Absinthe pads duck out of the way to allow the Beauty sound to remain most prominent. But when it goes away, the compressor will release and allow the pads to come back up to an optimum or a louder volume, a higher volume. So observe. You can see the gain reduction here. And I just have a very, very long release time so that it quite gently rises back up. And it ducks out of the way quickly when the melodic motif hits. So that's it for this, the very first episode of my new Anatomy of a Track series. I hope you found it interesting, useful, maybe even inspirational. Leave your questions in the comments and keep it constructive. Once again, this video comes bundled with mixdowns, stems, and instruments from the track in question when you buy from darkarps.com or eastvandigital.com. Thanks for watching.